Light Talk. Lumen Brothers. Light Talk. Light Talk. Light Talk. Lumen Brothers. Light Talk.
Well, hello and welcome to Light Talk. This is Stan, and I'm broadcasting from my beautiful state-of-the-art studio in the beautiful swamps of Gainesville, Florida.
Hi, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas.
And this is David, broadcasting from high up in the Rocky Mountains in Central City, Colorado. And we are the Lumen Brothers! Boy, we have a special show for you today. We do. We've got Gordon Pearlman here. Before we get to Gordon, though, I just have an announcement. We are happy to announce that this Wednesday, July 11th at 8:30 a.m. Central Time, we will be presenting our next episode of Light Talk with the Lumen Brothers from Madison, Wisconsin, from the ETC International Workshop. And believe it or not, that is going to be simulcast live across the world in video and audio, which is insane because no one's seen us. And except for the people at LDI, they're the only ones who's really ever seen us and our friends. And so, we're warning you right now, and we're going to be interviewing Fred Foster. So we're all very excited about that. Now, for the people who don't want to watch us live, the broadcast will be rebroadcast, audio only, on the following Saturday, which is the 14th, which happens to be my birthday. So, hey! So we won't get anyone singing happy birthday from me, but it'll be sort of like belated birthday. But anyway, we have a special guest today, a pioneer in the lighting industry, entertainment lighting industry.
Truly.
We are honored that Gordon Pearlman is here with us today. So, Steve, why don't you tell us a bit about Gordon?
Well, he began his career in the arts in 1966. While working as a TD and lighting designer at the University of North Carolina in 1973, 8 years before the PC, Gordon decided it was time for lighting control to move away from faders and handles and into the digital era. He applied for and received a grant to purchase a Digital Equipment Corporation PDP-8 and began his project. His work culminated in 1975 when a chorus line opened on Broadway using his LS8 control desk, signaling a complete change in lighting control forever. Since that time, Gordon has been responsible for the Kleigl Performance, Performer, and Command Performance consoles, the Strand Impact, the Morpheus Commander, and the GAM Accent, along with the complete line of Lightolier architectural controllers. Along with Steve Carlson, he formed Entertainment Technology, which over the years introduced many innovative products, including the Intelligent Power System, the first solid-state dimmer, and Horizon, the first PC-based control console. After selling Entertainment Technology, he served as Director of Technology for Philips Entertainment Lighting, that would be Strand, ET, and Verilight, working on the development of their extensive range of products. More recently, he has returned to his roots and lights an occasional show in Portland, Oregon, where he and his family have lived since leaving Chapel Hill. Gordon is a fellow of the Illuminating Engineering Society of North America and the United States Institute of Theater Technology. Recently, the Wally Russell Foundation awarded him the 2015-2016 Lifetime Achievement Award. Gordon, welcome to Light Talk. Have I left anything out?
Well, I think you covered it pretty well. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great that you're here.
It's really great to have you and to talk about all the work that you've done. And I've got the first question. So let's start with your early career. You were a lighting and scenic designer in the early days. And tell us a little bit about how you got into this, how it started, and how you sort of fell into this profession.
Sure. Well, like most of us, I started playing around in community theater and high school theater like everyone else. I went off to college to be a physics major. I went to see my advisor the first week I was there, and it turned out to be James Van Allen, who was the Van Allen belts, right? I was panicked when he erased part of the board to write my schedule down. But I quickly realized that I was not a physics major and gravitated toward the theater and have been doing it ever since in some form or another. Went to graduate school at Tulane. In those days, Tulane had the Tulane Drama Review and was quite a respected theater program. The year I left Tulane, they basically killed off the theater program. So we haven't seen much of it since then, but they did a 20-year plan. And the 20-year plan, the only mention of the theater was that they were going to tear down the building. And so the whole faculty left in one fell swoop, and that was the end of the theater department at Tulane. So that was my early start. My first job was in University of North Carolina system, where in Greensboro, a couple years after the sit-in in Greensboro. So it was an interesting community to live in those days. And then I moved over to Chapel Hill, where I was the TD and lighting designer there. And that was a great program. Chapel Hill was a little oasis in the middle of the South. I didn't know anybody in town who hadn't grown up and been educated in the North.
Was Playmakers rep there when you were there?
Playmakers Theater was there.
Playmakers
Theater was a fascinating building. It was built in the 1600s. It was the original library of the University of North Carolina, and basically they hadn't done much to it in the 300 years that passed since then. And but it was a nice experience. Like everywhere else in those days, we had no electronic dimmers or anything. Everything was Ariel Davis sliders, and but it was a very good place, a good department, and fun place to live and work.
That's great, Gordon. Hey, so I got the best question of the day. Tell us about how the LS8 came into being and the journey to a chorus line.
Okay, this is going to be most of the interview, I would assume.
That's cool. Take your time, because all our listeners, they're so excited to hear from you, and they hear from your own voice exactly what happened.
Yeah, I'm particularly curious about like the risk that was taken. You had Tharon and Musser and other people who were around you, and what was the sort of the energy like? Was it?
It was that part. I'll get to that part, but because it was a very big. The risk was unbelievable. We didn't know that at the time, but it certainly was. But it all started in Chapel Hill when one of my students came to me and said, I want to do a show, and I want 35 slide projectors in it. And in those days, there was no slide projector controls. They were all just carousel projectors with, remote control buttons on them. And so I headed over to the state warehouse, the surplus warehouse, and found an old paper tape reader. Most people don't even know what paper tape is, but it was paper tape that had 8 holes punched across it, and that was a byte. And every time you rolled the paper tape by, and it would read one more byte. And I got an old pinball machine. That was the only place you could find cheap relays. And I built a little device to control all these projectors. It then came into me, the knowledge then hit me that how the hell was I going to punch the paper tape? Because if you went to tech rehearsal one night and changed 3 cues, you had to repunch the entire paper tape, which was, a mile long, right? So in those days, they had teletypes were the terminal that we used, 55 baud. That's 5 characters per second, and it had a paper tape punch on it and a paper tape reader on it. And so I went to the computer center and learned how to write in BASIC, and wrote myself a little program where I could write cues and insert cues and delete cues, and then wait around for an hour while it punched the tape. But it did work. And so that got me into it. And so a few years later, had done a few other little crazy projects. Did a little rendering program that I actually showed at the ATEA convention in San Francisco in the late 60s, early 70s, I guess, with a dial-up line back to Chapel Hill. But I did that project, and then I had some friends that were in the computer business, and one of them said to me, we could probably do this with a PDP-8. I said, well, that'd be interesting. That'd be fun. And so I applied for a grant from the university. My chairman signed it. Later, he said he really regretted it. He signed it because it took up a lot of my time. But he signed it, assuming I would never get it, since nobody from the theater department had ever gotten a faculty grant before. But he didn't know that my next door neighbor was the chairman of the faculty grants committee. so that settled that little deal. And I bought a PDP-8. I mean, the grant was for nothing, $15,000, $20,000, something like that, right? And I bought the PDP-8, and I started learning how to write, and you got to understand, this is, when you look at it, when you call this a computer compared to today's computers, this was before integrated circuits. So this was all discrete circuitry. There was no RAM memory. That didn't exist either. This had core, which was literally a little magnetic donut for every bit that had been hand laced with 3 pieces of wire. So you could magnetize it or demagnetize it, and it would store the data. And it had 8K, not meg, not gig, 8K, 8,000 bytes of memory. And so virtually nothing. And that had to store the program and all the cues. So it was a challenging, writing one instruction, you wrote one instruction in code, and that translated to one machine instruction. And it couldn't do a hardware multiply. This is really a business about multiplying. So multiply took about 150 instructions, which was a lot of time. And so it was a very challenging project, but I got it done. And
this was to do the slide projectors, or
this was actually write cues and send out analogs. No digital, no DMX. So send an analog, send out 120 to 125 analog signals to dimmers, right?
I gotcha. Okay.
Most of the electronics was all tied up in just doing that, right? In sending out the signal. The D to A converter cost over $100. It was a very strange time. And so I got that running. We didn't have any electronic dimmers in Chapel Hill. We had one 12-pack of EDI dimmers. And so, 7 to 10 volts or some nonsense. No, 2 to 7 volts, I think.
2 to 7.
2 to 7 volts, right? I later worked for EDI for a while, and the story was they built the circuit and they turned it on, and it came on at 2, and it was at full at 7, so they were happy with that. So.
That's good.
So I was able to at least try it once before I left Chapel Hill, and then how the whole thing got to Broadway is a very interesting story. So I'm working in Chapel Hill, working on this. Joel Rubin comes down to visit me and is very impressed with it. And that Joel Rubin, if we don't know, is
I
Kleigl
do. He
Brothers.
listens to the show. He's lined up to be interviewed also.
Oh, good. I was going to make sure you do that because, boy, Joel knows more than anybody in this business.
Yeah.
And he's responsible for a lot of my career. So I'm really happy to listen to Joel and hear what he has to say. So Joel comes down in the press, sends Jonel Polanski, another name out of the past, down to look at it. They all decide, okay, this is for them. And I go to USITT at the Waldorf Astoria in New York, and Joel offers me a job, and I accept it.
How old are you, Gordon, when this is happening?
32, something like that. So Joel offers me a job, and I quit my job at Chapel Hill. And 2 or 3 months later, John Kleigl gets in domestic trouble with his family, and all bets are off at Kleigl. And so I now don't have a job. I've quit my job at Chapel Hill and don't have a job to go to Kleigl. This is all good news in the final analysis. So EDI, who was Electronics Diversified, a company out here in Portland, or actually in Hillsborough, the rep came and he looked at it and he called them and they came and they decided that they would build it. And so the whole thing changed to me coming to Portland, which was a wonderful happenstance because Portland is a wonderful place. And so I moved out to Portland, and I was supposed to go to work on July the 15th. And on about July the 7th, we moved into a new house in Portland. The house had been occupied by a bunch of rental students for a while, so it was a horrible mess. And so I've torn the bathroom apart and everything, and I'm getting ready to fix things up. You know, I'm an old TD. I do it all myself, right? And then somebody knocks on the door. I go open the door, and it's Paul Bennett, the president of Electronics Diversified. And he's there to tell me that I don't have a phone. That's why he's at the door to say, well, we promised to deliver this control system that we were going to design and for a Broadway show. He didn't know the name of the show. And it opens in 3 weeks, and we can't possibly deliver that, so we're going to deliver one of your units. Now, understand they'd never built one of my units. So in a mad dash, in a 3-day mad dash, and this was before FedEx, we built one unit. Paul was an ex-Tektronix person and basically had lots of people there he could make contacts with. So we ran all the PC boards in the middle of the night at Tektronix and did all of that kind of stuff and got it in 3 days. Literally people getting on airplanes and flying parts up from Los Angeles. And we built this unit. We stuck it on an airplane with me. And when I say stick it on an airplane, you got remember this thing was the size of a dining room table, right? So we loaded it into, had it loaded in the cargo capacity, and off I went to New York. And a little side story here: I get picked up by 4-Star in one of their vans that was at least 25 years old, and the guy who picks me up is just driving around Manhattan. Now, I've been to Manhattan enough times to know that this guy is either lost, and he keeps getting out of the car, no cell phones, and going to a payphone and calling on the payphone, and gets back in the car. We keep driving around, no explanation. Finally get to the theater, and it turns out that 4-Star and David Merrick are in a battle over who owns the equipment that's in the theater.
Jeez.
And the sheriffs are there.
The sheriff.
Right? Yeah, right. Repossessing all of the equipment. And they didn't want to put the LS8 in there until they were gone. So I mean, it quickly got settled as far as equipment. The next day, 4-Star delivered all new equipment, and they were fine. But it was such a funny ordeal to just drive around. And so we finally get it loaded into the theater, and so that's how it got on the show. It was completely being in the right time at the right place, and it was put on the show. And a little kind of interesting sidelights about this console. At this time, this was before the invention of floppy disks, and so to reload the program, you had to reload the program off a paper tape. And that took, after you toggled in the first 16 instructions on a front panel, so it was smart enough to read the paper tape. And then it would read the paper tape and load the program into this core memory, which was supposedly non-volatile, and it would just run. If you ever lost the program, or if program ever crashed, you had to reload it from the paper tape, which took at least an hour.
Whoa! Oh,
yeah,
my
right.
God.
So it was. Like I say, the whole thing gets in the miracle category because so we loaded the program on, we got it all set up, it worked perfectly. Tharon went crazy over it. I sat at the desk with her for the next 3 weeks. She would, where she had 1 cue, she would put 8.
Of course.
And she was just because the last time the show had already been done once. It'd been done at the Public, but on a 10-scene preset. So you can imagine what a thrill it was to be able to say, oh my God, I can just have cue after cue after cue after cue. And that's exactly what she did. And it was a wonderful experience just to sit there and watch her design. I already knew Tharon. I had met her when I was in Greensboro. There was a American Repertory Theater, did their out of town in the theater in Greensboro, and where I was the TV, and so Tharon was there lighted, so I was her assistant for a week or two. So so I already knew Tharon, but it was still a wonderful experience. And I said, I had gone there. My wife's home, 2 little kids, doesn't know a soul in Portland. We've just moved there. and I keep saying to Tharon every night we go out to dinner, and I say to Tharon, I really got to go home. My wife is there in Portland. She's driving me crazy. I just can't. I just must go home. And so Tharon says to me, well, here's what we'll do. We'll fly your wife out for opening night.
Nice.
And we'll pay for her trip. And you can be here for opening night, and then you can go home. Which they did, and which was a wonderful experience because we were there opening night. We were there for the previews. They were all wonderful. We went to Sardi's after the show and waited for the reviews at the table with Michael and the cast. And it was one of those experiences you just can never repeat.
Historic.
Yeah, historic, right? And it was wonderful. The sidelight to that note is that they never did pay me for my wife's ticket. Every time I would see Frank DeVerna for the next 50 years or 40 years that Frank and I were in the business together, I'd say, Frank, you never did pay me for that trip. So Frank owned 4-Star, if you don't know. Frank was 4-Star stage lighting. Another interesting Frank story. So when I was there and had these 3 weeks and nothing to do all day, I kept getting summoned to go places. One day I was summoned out to 4-Star to meet Frank. And I went out to meet Frank out in the worst neighborhood in the Bronx. The guy said, you came on the subway? You're crazy. You don't come on a subway here. so I go in, I meet Frank, and Frank takes me down the basement of 4-Star. And 4-Star has this basement completely full of piano boards. Those of your listeners who don't know what piano board is, it was 8 to 10 big rotary auto transformer dimmers, or sometimes mainly resistance dimmers, actually, because most of the theaters were still DC. And he had this whole room full of them. Must have been 100 of them. He said, they're all trash. He said, I'm going to have to throw them all away now, thanks to you. And he was serious, right? He did literally have to throw them all away after that, because no show would accept auto transformer dimmer, non and remote control dimmers after chorus line. So that was fun. And then I also got summoned one day to see Eddie Kook. Now, your listeners may not know who Eddie Kook is, but Lico is Levi Kook.
Yeah.
And Eddie Kook was the founder of Century Stage Lighting, which became Strand Stage Lighting, and was the real father of USITT and a great old guy. But I actually got, he was in the Sardi's building on the 8th floor and over there to meet with Mr. Kook. It was quite a wonderful experience in itself, right? So the show opened, it ran, everything worked just perfectly. About 2 weeks after the show opened, a technician from 4-Star was changing the fuse in the power supply and shorted the power supply up against the case and completely blew the thing up.
Oh, no.
And so I made a one-day trip to New York, took the red eye in the middle of the night and got there, got it all fixed, thank God, with the help of Steve Terry. This is how Steve Terry comes into the equation. They knew we had trouble, and they knew there was this real bright guy up at Dance Theater of Harlem that knew a lot about electronics, and so they hired Steve Terry to be there to help me. And with Steve Terry's help, we got it back together in one day, and I flew back home again. And then for the next 11 weeks, that machine ran the show with no possibility of, if it ever crashed, that it would ever recover, flawlessly, no problems whatsoever. And at that point, we were able to replace it with a new machine that actually did have, in the meantime, IBM had invented floppy disks and put them on the market and had a floppy disk in it so it could reboot off the floppy disk. And the interesting thing, the replacement for the toggling in the 16 instructions on the front panel was a board that had a matrix of 16 by 12 diodes in it. And you just cut away the diodes that you wanted to be ones and left the ones you wanted to be zeros. And that's how you got the 16 that was read-only. That was the version of read-only memory in those days. So it had 16 bytes of words of read-only memory, and that's how it got booted up. So it was a tremendous improvement, and that machine ran the show for the next 13 years with no trouble whatsoever. And when it finally was taken off the show 13 years later, Steve Terry again comes into the equation, and he gets it and takes it out to Production Arts and stores it because they were going to throw it away. And then about a year later, I had him ship it out to me, and we stored it for a little while. And one day I'm in my office and I get a call from the Computer Museum in Boston. They're going to do a history of computing, and they would like to have it to put in the exhibit. And of course, we said, sure. And Steve Terry provided some, I said to him, it still works. And the lady said, don't tell me that. If we know that, we have to keep it running. We don't want to keep it running, right? So we put a little, I think, TTI dimmer rack and a little TTI dimmer board hidden away that actually ran the lights. And they actually built a very nice replica of the booth at the Schubert. They had pictures of it. And the only thing that was dead wrong about the picture was that the mannequin running the console was a woman. And in those days, that was not anything that could have ever happened in the New York theater. Although there was a female follow spot operator on the opening of Chorus Line, which was also a big event, right?
Yeah, maybe they thought that was Tharon was running the board.
As much as people understand.
But they would have to put a cigarette in the mannequin's hand in order.
That's exactly right. Never without another cigarette.
I have a quick question, Gordon. I heard rumor, and just tell us if this is a rumor or not, that the board had very limited memory. So there was one song where just follow spots lit it, and that's one time that you reloaded the memory. Is that true?
That's correct. It actually was an intermission.
It was an intermission.
It was an intermission.
I can say I witnessed that because I watched the show run from the booth on that second iteration, and I checked this with Gordon a few days ago when we chatted. And I watched the show from the booth, and at intermission they swapped the floppy disk, and yep.
Yeah, I mean, and very limited memory. I mean, you remember now we were up to 16K, and we weren't at 8K anymore. We'd gotten up to an outrageous 16K, and the new unit actually had RAM in it. No, it still had core memory. It still had core memory. That's right. It still had core memory. So it was unbelievable to be able to get up to 16K. But still, we had to swap to get the whole show in because, like I said, Tharon went crazy.
Yeah, how much memory did she use in Act 1?
Oh,
who knows?
Who knows? Enough that we had to swap it.
Stop!
So the opening night of the Computer Museum, they invited us all out there, and we're all in our tuxedos. And here I am, a hacker par excellence, standing there with the guy who invented the Iliac and the guy who invented Copal and all of these things. And here I am, and of course, the next day, in the Boston papers, the only picture they used was of me and standing at the console of Chorus Line because it was by far the best picture you could have, right? But I was a little embarrassed since I really wasn't of their league in any way, shape, or form, right?
I mean, it was a watershed event for sure.
Yeah, it did change everything. It was way past due. The educational theaters and everything had electronic. Some of them had electronic consoles. They weren't stored programmed. They were hard coded. They were just electronics and gates and switches that did everything. But they did have it. But Broadway and everybody had electronic dimmers by then, or most of it. I didn't, but most everybody had electronic dimmers by then. But they had to convert the Schubert Theater in order to bring Chorus Line in there because the Schubert Theater was DC until Chorus Line opened.
I have a follow-up question. Think about Edison and light bulbs and lots of at that time when there's a lot of sort of activity in a particular space and different people are doing different things. Was there anybody else who was sort of doing these things at the same time that you were?
Oh, sure. There were. Can't remember. There was a little console called the Sweet 16, which was basically 16 channels, and it had a microprocessor in it, one of the first microprocessors in it, and basically it just had a slider, and you just threw the slider back and forth, and it went scene to scene to scene to scene to scene. It was very crude, but everything was very crude in those days. And there was a product called AutoCue, which was a TV product that was done by ABC that used a light pin, if you can imagine. And it was really not, it could play back cues, but it wasn't theatrical in any way, shape, or form. It didn't have fades and fade times, and it just put up the lights, because in TV, that's all you really needed, was to put the lights up in a particular pattern, right? But there were other people, and I think Dave Cunningham was actually working on something because he was able to come out very quickly when after we did this with something for starter rent. They were not interested in staying with EDI out here in Portland. They really wanted something from Strand, and so they went to Strand and had Strand build them something, and that was where Dave Cunningham got into the business.
We've got something sitting on the shelf at the University of Florida that is from that era, that was computer-controlled lighting, and it also was a word processor and had a ticket program. And we look inside, and it's got like hand soldered printed circuit boards and whatnot. So I'm not exactly sure of all of the history behind that one, but it sounds like there were a lot of innovations happening during that period.
There were some. There were not a lot. I wouldn't say it was. This was really early in the computer business. There wasn't much that was computerized. My brother worked for Philco at the time, and Philco had gotten a contract to build a add, subtract, multiply, and divide calculator. And the budget was $1,500 per unit, and they couldn't do it. So that kind of shows you where the technology was at those days, right?
Well, Gordon, you certainly didn't stop there. Tell us about the Kleigl Performer and that reaction at USITT in Seattle.
Well, we did performance and command performance before we did Performer, but until we did Performer, there really was no mass production. Everything, Kleigl was an old metal bending shop, as was Strand, right? And that they did everything, Century, it wasn't Strand then, and they did everything as a one-off. It didn't matter what it was. Even the electronic consoles were one-offs. You ordered one, they would build it, right? A little funny story in there is we did the plans for performance, and we sent them off to Kleigl to the metal shop, and then we did the PC boards. And, he gave them very, very accurate drawings of what the front panel was supposed to be. And we get there and nothing fits. So I go to the metal shop and I say to the guy, well, how did you punch this? And he takes out a ruler. And he says, well, I just marked it up on this panel we got, thousands, tolerances in the thousands, and they're doing it with a ruler. And so that kind of shows you what, because in those days they punched the holes, and then they put the switches in the holes, and then they wired them up. So they didn't understand that everything had to be very precise. So Performer was the first attempt at doing something that didn't require a big desk. In those days, if you toured with a lighting control console, you insisted that the theater provide you with an air-conditioned space to put it in, and a lot of times you carried a second one. And so Performer was the first attempt to actually build a portable console. And so we kept it very quiet that we were working on this. Nobody knew about it. And it was all being done out here in Portland. Nobody even in New York knew that we were at Kleigl knew much about it, right? So what was fun about that, so Kleigl sets up their booth at this was in Seattle, at USITT in Seattle. And Kleigl sets up their booth, and they put 8 tables out on the floor. But again, don't let anybody know what's going to be on these 8 tables, right? And like I said, everything was a one-off. If you needed a console for the trade show, you built a console for the trade show and took it there, and then you sold it afterwards, right? And so at 10 minutes before the floor is supposed to open, 8 Kleigl employees walked down from the Kleigl suite, each carrying a Performer, and put them up on these stands. And so where people who were used to seeing a prototype at trade shows saw 8 production units at one time, which was just blew everybody away. Nobody could believe that anybody was mass producing theatrical consoles. And it was a wonderful experience. It got a little dampened by the end of the day because Kleigl having a fight with one of their reps, the Minneapolis rep, and he shows up with the sheriff. And
another sheriff. The sheriff seemed to follow you around.
and takes all the performers off the floor. We got them right back because at that point I hadn't, they still belonged to me. They didn't belong to Kleigl. So
Yeah, Gordon, I have a question about the Performer. Well, my first question is, well, actually I have two questions. Was this before the mini palette or is this after the mini palette?
It was before the mini palette.
Okay, great. So you guys really the first ones to make the portable memory board. Second of all, why did you guys decide to go with tape, with a cassette instead of a floppy?
Size. You remember floppies were not the size that floppy disks are
That's
today.
right. They were like 5.25.
They were
right?
5.5-inch disks, right? They were very large. You would never have been able to get a floppy disk into that case anywhere. Or you barely got the cassette in there. And the cassette was only storing the cues, so it was the development system that I developed LS8 on had cassette tapes as its storage device. But it was purely size. There was no other reason that we went with that. A floppy would have been, and floppies were still not something that was readily available or easy to work with. You had to write your own drivers for them. There were no drivers out there, and all the timing became very, very, very crucial. We did, I think we actually did have a floppy on Performance, which was before this, had a floppy. So we knew how to do floppies. We certainly could have done floppies. It would have been easier, but floppies were very big. And the one that we had on Chorus Line, another side story, had a belt drive, and the belt kept falling off the bottom of the drive. That was the biggest problem they had with that console, was the belt would fall off.
Oh, that's funny.
But that's the reason we went with a floppy, with the
cassette. Right.
Yeah. And it was just an audio cassette. I mean, that was before the days of digital cassettes.
Sure.
It was just an audio cassette where you were putting on tones onto the tape, right?
Well, I've got the next question, Gordon. So you've been involved in the forefront of a lot of industry first, the Morpheus Pan Command, a complete line of architectural controls for Lightolier, intelligent power system, chokeless dimming, the Horizon console, which I remember very well getting involved in, and all these PC products we see today. Do you have a couple of favorites in that group? What really got you excited?
It's hard to say favorites. Certainly, the stuff we did for Lightolier was great fun. I mean, it was a completely different kind of project, and we actually had a patent on putting a microprocessor in a light switch, and so all of these products that you see today all derived out of those products that we did for Lightolier. That's kind of a fun story too. I just sitting in my office in Portland, and now we've split off from Kleigl at this point. Turns out that Kleigl had a rule that you couldn't make more money than John Kleigl, and since I was being paid on royalties, I was making a lot more money than John Kleigl. So we had to spin the company off so that John Kleigl didn't know how much money I was making. And so that's where entertainment technology came from. And so we're spun off from Kleigl, and I get a telephone call from Lightolier, from Steve Carson at Lightolier, and he says, I've got this project that I've been working on, and we can't get it to work right, and could you guys help us? I said, well, we'd be willing to take a look at it. And he shows up with this box just crammed with electronics. It's supposed to be a wall box unit with 4 dimmers in it, and we say to him, well, we could help you fix that one, but boy, we could certainly do it a lot simpler. And that's where the whole principle of taking the microprocessor and firing the SCR, or TRIAC in this case, directly off the microprocessor came from. And that was, so no analog circuitry at all. So basically in this box, there was a microprocessor and four TRIACs and 4 little tiny chokes. And we did get it all into a 4-gang box. So you had a 4-scene preset, 4-dimmer unit in a 4-gang box. And that just changed the whole industry. And then we put it in one box, a single dimmer. And why that, I have to say, is my favorite project, because it put my kids through college. Entertainment lighting business is fun, but it's not that profitable. The architectural lighting business is a whole different game. I mean, when you start getting royalties on projects that are shipping 1,000 a day, it's a whole different kind of philosophy.
Order of magnitude.
Yeah, it's a whole different order of magnitude. The vice president of Lightolier, who was out at our house one day, said, he said to me, he says, this project's going to put your kid through college. And he was right. It certainly did. And so that one's high up on and it was fun. And it got me into this very long-term relationship with Lightolier. They finally bought the company from me in the end. And so that was great. The other projects, the Morpheus project was fun, interesting. And the biggest mistake I ever made in my whole career was trying to do this chokeless dimming project. It just became such a sinkhole that all the consultants, we worked with all the consultants. We worked with Steve Terry and the rental companies a lot. We built them exactly what they wanted, and because it cost 20% or 30% more than they could buy a track dimmer for, nobody ever bought any. And so it was a great project. It proved a point, but it never went anywhere. Philips still builds them and still sells them, so there is some market for them. But at the same time, the dimmer business was just dwindling away to nothing because of LEDs, and ETC. Fred had just completely changed the industry.
That's true.
Kleigl and Strand were both metal bending companies that didn't understand service, didn't understand. Kleigl we had a joke that Kleigl said, we haven't got time to finish this project. We've got plenty of time to finish it on the job site. So it was, and then Fred comes along and offers real service and real support and understands electronics and really, as you all know, completely took over the business. Yeah. I mean, Strand sort of still exists, but put Kleigl and Strand out of business.
Let me make a comment about Horizon, because I remember that being marketed by Roscoe, and I remember using it, and I still see aspects of Horizon in current light boards. I mean, the tombstone with the information all embedded that way in that little shape. I see things in EOS now that were pioneered in Horizon, and I don't know, do you guys remember that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was another funny story. I mean, we didn't actually do that. That was done by an outside consultant, Alan Martello. And I went to a trade show, and in some other booth, he was showing a little thing he'd done, and I said, oh, this guy understands. And so I made a deal with him to do Horizon. And that was before we were bought by Roscoe. And it did. We sold a lot of consoles. But the console we really sold the most of was Access. Huh. That was the Access project that we did for GAM. Joe Cheweel and I had gone to China on a IES tour. And on the way back, Joe said to me, you guys should do something for me, something that's in my product range, right? And, his product range was, disposables and gel and filters and something that sold for under $100. And I said, well, it's probably time for a really down and dirty control console. Control consoles to that time were still pretty big, expensive, in the $20,000 price range minimum. And that was a lot of money, $20,000 in those days. Yeah. And so we just sat out and decided we would try and do a console and now we'd had all this experience with Lightolier using little microprocessors to do all this stuff. And I said, I bet we could build a really inexpensive console. And we did. I think it sold for about $1,500. And GAM had a policy that you couldn't buy one, you had to buy 6 was the minimum sale. And in the first year, we must have sold 3,000 of them.
Wow.
And that was unheard of in those days. Everybody always asked me, how much did it cost to manufacture? And the parts cost, no labor, but the total parts cost was $148. So it was really a complete departure from what everybody else was building. And it was fun. And it did put computerized dimming in the hands of thousands of people that never would have had it otherwise.
Yeah, that's true.
You're like the Henry Ford of lighting control.
Yeah. Well, proof of concept seemed to be my business. I would prove it, and then everybody else would go out and do it over again, right?
Of course.
But it was fun. It was a fun place to be, right?
Gordon, could you tell us about the Wally Russell Foundation and your Lifetime Achievement Award?
Well, sure. I mean, it was a wonderful honor. A couple of years ago, the Wally Russell Foundation, which really just gives awards to the people in the manufacturing end of the business rather than some others, but people who normally wouldn't get recognized by any other organization. It's a very nice honor. I've been involved with the committee for years. A little side story, one year at USITT, maybe LDI, I think. They were giving the Wally Russell Award. They were giving it to someone who I wasn't quite sure should be getting it, and I was moaning a little bit. And Larry Kellerman, another great name out of the business, walked up to me and says, "Well, be quiet, Gordon. We're going to put you up there one of these days." I said, no, not possible. And so they did. I did get the award, and it was a very big honor, and I really appreciated it from all the people on the foundation board.
Well, let me ask you another question while we're here. You keep talking about in your bio that you were retired. What are you really up to?
Oh, that's a fun part of the story. So, you get used to doing things, and then you retire, and you say, "Well, I hadn't been doing much programming for the last 10 years before I retired." I said, I think I'll go back. And I was on a website. I got an email one day, and I don't know how I got on this list, and it was an email that said, "Learn how to write apps for the iPhone." And it was one of these online classes, and it cost $10.
Yeah,
I said, what can I lose for $10? So I took this class, and it's this guy with a baseball cap on backwards who says, "Hey," and "yeah," and "how you doing" a lot, and probably 20 years old,
right.
But he did teach you how to write an app for the iPhone. And so I said, well, now I know how to write an app for an iPhone, or I know a little bit about how to write an app for it. Turns out I didn't know much at all, but what do I know how to do? I know how to make lighting control consoles. So I said, okay, I'll try and make a lighting control console for an iPhone. And this is a 2-hour, 3-hour a week project, probably averages much less than that because I travel a lot. But whenever I just felt like sitting down and playing with it, I would play with it. And I got it to where I basically had Performer. I called it iPerformer just to be funny. And I basically had Performer done with color control. And I said, well, that's nice, but that's not where the industry is these days. I went out and looked and said, well, the industry's really in, and a point I meant to make earlier, but I'll throw it in now. This is a completely different industry than it was when we got into it. There were probably 300 people gainfully employed in the lighting entertainment business when I got into it, in the entertaining lighting business. Now there are thousands and thousands, and what's happened with DMX is just bizarre. But so I said, okay, I'll try this. So now this has been going on for 2 or 3 years. This is not an overnight project because I work on it so little. And now I'm making it do the whole thing, playbacks, multiple playbacks, and palettes and groups and all of those kind of things. If I ever release it, I don't know. Probably never, because once you release it, then you have to maintain it. Then you have people who say, "Oh, I want it to do this and that," and
Just sell it.
Who wants to? It's hard to make money in the. I think it would be hard to really make money off of it because how much can you sell it for?
Wait, we could call it the Lumen Brothers Light Talk
No,
console.
let's get in on that.
As a prize.
As a prize.
We have a raffle.
Yeah, big prize.
We raise money for charity, or something for the foundation.
So that's probably what I'll probably do. If I do release it, I'll just donate the money, but it's after I pay for my expenses. But it keeps me busy. Computer programming is much like doing puzzles, right? It's just figuring out the slickest, cutest way to do a particular job. And the iPhone has so many, all modern computers have so many wonderful things that you can do that we never even thought were possible in the days when we started out in this business.
So I've got the last question, Gordon, and this will let you we'll ask you to sort of imagine what is on the horizon in the lighting world from your perspective. Do you predict if you had a crystal ball?
Well, yeah, that's a hard one because clearly the EU has made it clear that incandescent sources or non-LED sources are on their way out, and that's probably as much screaming and yelling as everybody's going to do. It is going to happen, right?
True.
And so that's going to be a big change when we go to all solid state devices. But Len Auerbach, old friend, met him at the first USITT convention I went to in the 60s. Len said to me one time, he says, I figured that someday it's going to be a video projector on the right side of the front of house and the one on the left side of the front of house, and that's going to be it. Everything's going to come from there. Now, I don't think we're actually going to get to that, but we frequent the Oregon Shakespeare Festival a lot, and in their new theater, in their new small little black box, they have 6 video projectors projected straight down onto the floor, and they use them for backlight. They use them for front light sometimes. It's quite fascinating to see what you can do with real powerful video projectors. They do project on scenery on the floor sometime, but that's not what they use them for, man. I mean, they're using them for the downlights and effect lighting, and it's quite interesting to watch. And I assume that's where we're going to end up. We're going to end up with moving lights that don't really move, and of course that won't happen immediately, because one of the things people love about moving lights the most is seeing them actually move, right?
Yeah,
the
right.
moving head machines. So, but I assume we'll end up somewhere in that realm, and it'll certainly all be solid state.
Well, Gordon, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us today. I really enjoyed the interview.
Me too. Great stuff, and that none of us knew, and now we'll have it there to keepsake.
Yes, Gordon. Thank you so much for being with us today. This has been a true honor. I mean, you are definitely a giant in the lighting industry, and thank you for giving us computer control. Oh my God, changed everything.
Okay, well, thank you guys. It was a pleasure.
Well, guys, that Hammond organ solo in the background tells us that once again you've spent your Saturday morning listening to Light Talk. You can listen to Light Talk every week on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and all your favorite podcast providers. And don't forget to join Light Talk on Facebook so that you can post your questions and comments, and subscribe to Light Talk so that you won't miss 1 second of Lumen insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast.
In other words, stop and think.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Central City, Colorado, Gainesville, and the Lone Star State.
And today, Portland, Oregon, with Gordon.
And be sure to tune in next week when we travel to Madison, Wisconsin, where we will be broadcasting live at the ETC workshop for a chat with ETC founder Fred Foster. You can check us out on the ETC YouTube channel live Wednesday morning, 8:30 Central Time. Or you can check us out at our regular broadcast time on Saturday, July 14th.
Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
Well, we'll see you all next Tuesday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Lumen Brothers.
Nice.